Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the claims that the globalist controlled media are making and asserting, and it's coming out of academia as well. But this idea that young men, or young white men to be specific, are being drawn to, with some irresistible force, an unstoppable gravitational pull that's bringing or encouraging or radicalizing is the term they use, young white men to be fascists and Nazis and will rush out and buy swastikas and so on. Now, they seem so, well, we don't understand it. How is this happening? Why are these young white men being drawn to fascism? We need to sort of, pass PARSC. We need to pass this a little bit and just have a look at what they're saying. Now, as the mass migration ramps up, and as the attempts to shut down any dissent, questions, or anything to do with that mass migration. Remember, the mass migration is coming exclusively, or pretty much exclusively, from the surplus populations of the world that are all black and brown. And they're mostly Islamic. So that's the source of the surplus populations, the places that have got births per woman of 5, 6, 7, 8 children. So now as this mass migration has ramped up, which it has over the last couple of years, just in Australia alone, they're bringing in over 500,000 a year, for goodness sakes. And Australia's only got a population of mid 20 millions, or it did when they started bringing these people out in mass, super mass numbers. Remember years ago, even an intake of 70 or 80,000 a year was considered huge. Now it's 500,000 plus, and we're not supposed to notice it or say anything. I think I mentioned, or did mention, a video over the last few days when I was downtown in the city, in Sydney City, in peak hour, taking public transport. For the most part, white people were either didn't exist. There was not a single white person on the train platform, or even in areas where you think white people would be, at least plentiful. At best, 20% of the people were white, and the people around, certainly around me, weren't the upper classes of the third world. They were the absolute peasants of the peasants. Those are the people that are being brought into the West, and I can go past hundreds and hundreds of meters of through shopping strips and miles of takeout food stores and so on. There's not one white person anywhere employed in any of these takeout food stores. But this gets noticed by people, and but in order to counter it and to pre-counter it, and the propaganda machine already moves into place as, or even before, the mass migration begins. So they know that it's going to be unpopular. They know that people don't want it. They know questions will be asked. They know that people will complain. This is already known before they do it. They already know that. So they preset the position that anyone who doesn't like it or questions it or has any disagreement with any facet of it, such as all the murderous criminals that get brought in, that sort of stuff. If anyone does have a problem with that, then they are the problem, not the mass immigrants that come in, not the politicians under the control of the globalists that make it happen. The problem is anyone who notices it or complaining about it. And they're that. So they want to really gin up this sort of preconditioning propaganda. They want to really gin that up to say, well, if you disagree with it, you are Hitler. You are a swastika waving Nazi fascist Hitler. Now, the bigger the mass migration, of course, and the more far-reaching and the greater its effects, and you can't, unless you live in the wealthiest areas of Australia these days, you can't not be affected by it. Then there's going to be questions and complaints and concerns and so on. So they're getting in beforehand. So if you even think about complaining, you are Hitler. And if you actually do get around to complaining, then you're a radicalized fascist, Nazi, swastika waving bigot, xenophobe. Hitler thrives. So So that's the structuring of their propaganda. They're preempting the obvious complaints that are going to get, and they're getting in early with an entire architecture of propaganda to demonize anyone that complains. Now, so part of that demonization process is this idea that white people in particular will not do well at it, because along with mass migration comes affirmative action and diversity, equity, inclusion, which is code speak for not giving white people jobs, or not giving white people degrees, or not giving white people scholarships and freebies and handouts. So white people notice this and they're not happy about it, and so they may complain or ask questions. So it's a pre-demonization as well as so it goes in tiers: pre-demonization, actual demonization, then post the complaint demonization. So it's an architecture of demonizing white people to preempt the obvious complaints that the globalists know are going to be made, reasonable and justifiable. Now, these complaints are quite reasonable. So, well, if you want to bring in all these black and brown peasants, we want to vote on it. Hitler, only Hitler would want that. Okay, well, if all these people are going to go, why can't we bring in skilled people? Hitler again, Swastika waving Nazi salute Hitler. And so every question, reasonable position, they've pre-demonized. They've pre-demonized all of it. And this is of course to neutralize any pushback against the mass migration, which, by the way, is the absolute fundamental core of the globalist project. That is it. You take that away, then the globalists have no project. That is the core of it. The mass migration of third world peasants, surplus populations into the West, against and over the objections and in defiance of the wishes of the local white people. And because they're openly defying the white people, they have to demonize their complaints and their concerns and be dismissive of them. It's only the complaint of Nazis. Only Hitler would do that sort of thing. So, but now we've got this thing where their propaganda somehow isn't working anymore, and they're clearly worried about it. So why is the propaganda not working? It must be because of some sort of mysterious miasma of radicalization that's happening out there. It's Andrew Tate, and it's the radicalization. So let's have a look at that, and that's the primary sort of point, I guess, of this vid. So I can't see where this radicalization comes from. Now, the globalists control the education system, so the entire schooling system from a young age, the entire schooling system from 5 years old onwards, and even earlier than that, if you look at children's entertainment, 5 years old onwards through to university. And bear in mind that 40 to 50% at least of all Western populations are being processed through university as well. Again, affirmative action stuff. Very low IQ people are being waved through into university purely on the basis they're a minority of some sort. And so they've got control through the education system. They've got control of all young minds from, say, the age of 5 to the age of 21, 22 years old. I mean, that's a long slab of time. Now, on top of that, pretty much every movie, without exception, the entire sort of Hollywood or the entertainment production industry, whether it be in Norway or Australia or the United States, Canada, Britain, Ireland, Spain, or so, it doesn't really matter. The whole canon of entertainment is completely controlled by the globalist propaganda machine. So we're fed an endless diet of white people bad, brown black people good, man bad, woman good, straight person bad, lesbian good, and it's endless propaganda shaming and blaming straight white people for being evil fascist Nazis. When I do a search on propaganda and misinformation, it doesn't have anything denouncing the globalists. Instead, there are images like the English flag, or even Elon Musk. Talk about a loaded algorithm for depicting it, and that in itself is quite absurd. Nonetheless, the education system, entertainment, TV programs. You can't see any TV program made these days without it morally lecturing you. Product advertisements morally lecture you. You'd think in Australia that there's barely a white person in the country. You'd think that it's pretty much black from top to bottom. TV adverts, you can't go to any cultural institution without, again, being propaganda sort of delivered at you at all sides. So you've got wall-to-wall anti-Western, anti-white, anti-male, anti-straight, anti-Christian propaganda from 5 years old onwards. Even if you look at children's cartoons, or just children's entertainment programs, that too, and this is what young children, 3, 4 years old, be looking at, that too is laced with propaganda, and some of it quite hard hitting. They're really pushing it. They're hoping that the young minds, being much less critical, will just take it as fact, which many probably do. So the propaganda machine is massive and monumental. Advertising billboards everywhere. I saw one in the Sydney city that was trying to shame and blame men for not going to watch women's football. For goodness sakes. So again, endless propaganda on all sides. Similarly, throughout school and sports and anything at all. Footballers and prominent sports people are lectured to go around the schools and tell them, boys how they're all rapists and they're all evil and bad. There are endless propaganda road shows going around the schools, and all Christians and males are bad, and so it's a propaganda barrage crescendo that is non-stop from the moment that the child's able to even have a moderate or minimal grasp of what's going on around them. So I don't know, 3 years old or something, all the way through to their early 20s. And even after that, the entire entertainment industry, advertising and cultural institutions, any literature you get hold of. You go into a bookshop now and have a look at the way they feature and aggressively feature the propaganda books. So if you've got a book about, well-recognized book about history or something, that's relegated to like the bottom of a back shelf. But the feature position is how evil Nazi fascist men destroyed the world and made it a bad place. That's the feature book. But it's quite clearly propaganda. And again, you look at all the cultural institutions and so on. So it's difficult to get away from the propaganda that is all one way. White people bad, white men bad, Christians bad, straight men bad. It's all one way. And so given the propaganda, how is it possible, even remotely possible, that young white men could be radicalized away from that position? Now, I would argue the radicalization is the propaganda they're being fed. I would say that is the radicalization. So really the complaint of the globalists is that our propaganda is not working. Why is it not working, they ask? Well, it's not working because these young men, these boys, have an alternative. They can choose. They can choose to look at other sources of information, and that's what radicalizes them. So that's code speak for they're choosing to look at other information because they find it more palatable, or whatever the case, more accurate. It's not morally lecturing them. It's not telling them they're evil, bad, and Hitler, Nazis. So they look at that, look at this other information because they can find it online. They can choose. It's not being pushed at them. The globalist propaganda is being pushed at them, force-fed, beating them over the head with it. But these young men, or again, could be schoolboys. They're choosing to look at this other information. and that information provides an alternative point of view. This outrages the globalists, as it used to outrage the Soviet communists. Any government that's imposed without the consent of the people is outraged, absolutely outraged, when people have alternative sources of information. You know, all the communist regimes went to exceptional lengths to block Western TV programs and Western radio broadcasts, to prevent any Western books from being, or magazines or music or anything like that coming into their place, the communist places, because it provided an alternative narrative or an alternative source of information, and this was considered threatening to the ideological structure of government, imposed government, not government by consent of the people, but imposed government. And imposed government, which is what globalization is, by the way, let's call it by its proper name, that is terrified of alternative sources of information or alternative points of view or alternative structures of narrative. So this is what we're seeing. This is the issue here. Young men aren't being radicalized. Young men are realizing that they don't want to buy into the globalist program. It's bullshit. It's being imposed. It's without their consent. All it does is demonize them and tell them they're evil, whilst lowering their standard of living and making their lives more difficult. So, of course, young white men, if they've got an alternative source of information, will turn to it. They'll listen to it and realize, hey, hold on a minute, these globalists are screwing me. They're screwing me and screwing me badly. So they will take on alternative positions, or at least consider them. This is hardly a bad thing, but the globalists do view it as a thing, because, again, I come back to this thing. Globalization is imposed control. It is not control with the consent of the people. And so once people realize this and will come to the early stages of that realization, then they're not happy with it, and they do want to discuss alternatives, and they do want to vote for politicians that will say, stop the moral lecturing, stop lowering my standard of living. And an absolute fundamental part of that lowering my standard of living is bringing in all these third world peasants. That is lowering my standard of living, lowering my chances in life, making my life more difficult. Stop it. I've never agreed to it. Don't want it. And so young men, and even young men, some young men that were interviewed in Germany when the German election, I think it was a provincial election in Thuringia, I think it was. And these young men were talking about how they're finishing high school. They're at that age. They were talking about how the mass migration is negatively affecting their standard of living and their quality of life and so on, and also their job opportunities and the like. So they're going to vote for people who want to improve their lives. Not lecture them about how they're all Nazi or this or that, but improve their lives. And so this is what's happening. And the globalists are like any imposed government. The globalists are terrified when people have alternative sources. So they talk about radicalization. Now, anyone who has access to an alternative source of information would automatically be, opposed to mass migration. I mean, who wants it? Nobody wants it. No one's agreed to it. No one's voted for it. So the globalists view this as a radicalization process, or any source of information that doesn't support and enhance and buttress the globalist position. And this is what they're concerned about. There's something radical about these young men saying, I think migration should be reduced to skilled migration and so on. I mean, what's radical about that? Nothing radical about that. But the globalists, because they control so much of the information machine, think they have the capacity to say, well, anyone that says that must be Hitler. Not Hitler once or twice, but thrice. Hitler thrice. Swastika waving Hitler, no less. So in spite of their total control of the information flow, the globalists still can't convince people that they're evil fascist Nazis, and if they just even ask questions of their supposedly representative democratic government. And so the globalist response isn't, of course, to deal with the issues. It's an imposed form of government. Why should they deal with you? Why should they listen to the people? They need to shit on their shoes. These people, what do we care about them? So their response is to say, if we can cut off all sources of information other than the information we deliver, then we'll radicalize, that will control the people, and they won't have any alternative positions. Now, what's interesting is when the Soviet Union fell apart, in Eastern Europe too. Now, the Soviet Union had been under communist rule for 70 odd years, and Eastern Europe for 40 odd years, and the majority of the populations, nearly all of them in the Soviet Union, and the majority of the populations in Eastern Europe, because they'd only known communism. It was a surprise to pretty much all onlookers, myself included, by the way, when the communist governments fell, that so many people said, well, we never believed what the communists were. We knew it was all lies. We knew it was all bullshit. It's only because they had so many secret police and they could arbitrarily arrest you, take you out back and shoot you, beat the crap out of you, imprison you arbitrarily, all this. So it's only because the state gave those powers to itself. It was only because of that we pretended to go along, but we never believed it. We knew it was crap. We knew the newspaper was full of lies and propaganda. We knew the TV programs were full of propaganda. We knew it was all crap. We knew that the schools were teaching us propaganda. So between 65 and 75% of the population were convinced that that nothing that the government was telling them was true. It was all lies. And that surprised me. I thought that propaganda would have been far more successful in that, but in the end, it wasn't. And I don't know how successful the propaganda is being in the West today. The globalist, the globalist propaganda. I think it's much less successful than they think. But when their propaganda fails to hit the mark, they instantly push the button for it's radicalization, Hitler, Nazi, Swastika. That's their instant go-to. But I think it's more than that. It's more nuanced than that. Their propaganda is failing because people can look around them and see how much their neighborhoods are deteriorating, the lower standard of living, the lower purchasing power, and so on. They can see all that, and they're not happy with it, and they want their government to do something about it. But it's not their government anymore. All the politicians are controlled by the globalists, with only a few rare exceptions. You've been fantastic today. Your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.